In this recording, we're going to briefly review the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula is a pretty cool technique because it works all the time, unlike factoring, where only works when you have a certain rational set of solutions. Quadratic formula is not something to be intimidated by. It's pretty straightforward if you break it up into two parts, which is what we're going to do here. First thing is we need to know what is the quadratic formula. Okay, and the best way to get it stuck in your head, it's annoying, but it's going to get in that head, is with a song, just like you learn the alphabet. So we're going to sing it together. Hopefully you'll sing along with me. X equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And we're going to sing that in class a bit too. And this is true, this quadratic formula is true for x, where, you should write this as well, where ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. In other words, you have to have a quadratic equation that is equal to 0 in order for the a, b, and c components, those parameters or coefficients, to be substituted into the formula to tell you what the value or values are of x. All right, so here's what I like to do with a quadratic formula. I like to break it up into two parts here. The b squared minus 4ac and then the rest of the quadratic formula. So I'm going to always work that part out first. So over on our left side, we're going to say what a is, what b is, and what c is. Of course, I can't identify a, b, and c yet because it's not in what we called standard form. It's not set equal to 0. So set it equal to 0, get 2x squared minus 4x. We have to subtract the 1 from both sides, equals 0. Now I can identify that a is 2, b is negative 4, and c is a negative 1. We're going to evaluate the discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac. Okay, we're going to figure out what that is. So it's negative 4 squared. You have to parenthesize the negative 4 in order to square that negative base. Minus 4 times a, which is 1, times negative 1. Now, do some figuring. Figure this out. Get a value. If you're using the calculator, I recommend to put it directly into the calculator in one step. Of course, you can use this, figure this out in your head too. That's positive 16. We have a minus a negative 8. Now, minus a negative 8 is like a plus 8, right? So it's a positive 24. And you'd get that same value if you put it all into your calculator. I find students make mistakes when they put it in the calculator in multiple steps. Just put it in at once. All right. So you might say, well, what have we done? Well, we've figured out the value of the discriminant. So now when I write out the quadratic formula, x equals negative b, so negative negative 4, would it be okay if I just say that's positive 4? Plus or minus the square root of, now I'm going to make kind of a small radical sign there. Why? What is the square root of b squared minus 4ac? I didn't leave very much space for all that because I already know it, right? It's that 24 that we just figured out. So I'm just going to substitute the 24 in place here. Use the same color so you can see it. All over 2a. Well, 2 times 2, which is 4. All right. So we've made the quadratic formula not too tough here. Now I've just got 4 plus or minus, and that would be the answer right there if I didn't have a way to break down the square root of 24, but I do. I can make it into square root of 4, square root of 6, which becomes 2 square root 6, all over 4. I see a common factor of 2 in all the terms, so what I'm going to do is factor out a 2 from the numerator to make it 2 plus or minus square root of 6 all over 4, which would allow me to factor out, I've factored it out, excuse me, which would allow me to divide out that common factor of 2. So I've got a 2 remaining in the denominator, 1 remaining in the numerator. So our answer looks like 2 plus or minus square root of 6 all over 2. I can't make it any simpler. And now it's just a matter of, all right, it said to express the irrational roots. These are irrational roots, right? It's got a square root of 6. In simplest radical form, it is and as decimals rounded to the hundredth. So we go to our calculator, put that into the calculator, get the positive and with the negative, and so my approximate answers rounded to the hundredth would be 2.22 and negative 0.22. Those would be my approximate answers right there. All right, so you've watched me teach through an example. You need to do a couple on your own, and I'm going to give you two to consider right here, which I'd like you to work out and then play the recording when you've got these worked out. So I think you've seen the technique. You've used the technique before, so just a review. I want you to totally solve these two equations using the quadratic formula. Get their decimal approximation if they're irrational, and don't play the recording until you've gotten as far as you possibly can or you've got your answers. Okay, so hopefully for this one on the left side, you've worked it out. We've identified what the A, B, and C are, figured out the discriminant. We're always going to do that first because it makes the quadratic formula just so much simpler, right? 72 is the discriminant. Okay, so I've got negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 square root of 2 when I break down that 72 into 36 and 2, all over an 18. I'm noticing that there's a common factor of 6, so I factor out the 6. If you say to me, well, Mr. Clinton, can't I just divide all the terms by 6? Yes, you can. But just be careful as you're doing so. You're dividing all the terms in the expression by the same value. I prefer to factor it out. It's clearer that way. So we've got what's left, which is negative 1 plus or minus square root of 2 over 3, which simplifies, which evaluates using your calculator to 0.14 and negative 0.84. Over on the right side, you work out the discriminant. Turns out the discriminant is a 4, which is kind of cool because if the discriminant's a perfect square we found, it could have been factored. And you probably looked at this thing in the first place and said, hey, I can factor that, right? Well, you can, but I wanted you to solve it by the quadratic formula. So go ahead and proceed with this process. Even though factoring works, the quadratic formula will as well. Square root of 4 is just 2. Split it off into the two mini fractions, one of which gives us 4, and the other of which gives us 2. Of course, we can check all these answers by subbing them back in. If they're exact, it'll check exactly. If they're approximate, it'll be very close. Thanks for watching.